Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and welcome to the Year of the Snake. Let's head down to the board and take a look at just a small amount of this fantastic collection. Let's start with this fabulous clasp pair, the head of the snake and the tail of the snake, which link beautifully together, which you can use with this absolutely fantastic, incredibly serpentine piece. We've got some beads, but what's beautiful about these beads is how they look and move when they all link together. I love this titanium coloured section here, and you can imagine just dozens of those all stacked up together. And the same with these, when they all stack together, and I'll show you a piece in a moment with some of these on, they create the most beautiful tessellation. And again, the colours on there are absolutely magnificent. We have got scale inspired beautiful large hole beads. We have got almost disco ball like sequin beads. These are huge and beautiful, absolutely gorgeous glittery pieces there. I have got some outstanding glass scale beads, and I'm going to be working with one of these in a few moments time. I cannot wait also to work with this particular piece. Reminds me of the jewellery of royalty. It's absolutely outstanding. And not to mention this fantastic strand, which is wolf grey, which just works so beautifully with these chevron beads and all of the colours and shades of grey and shapes therein. In just a moment, I'm going to show you how we can work with one of these fantastic scale glass beads. What we're going to make today is this central component. Now I have curved this around so that it sits on the back of the wrist really beautifully. And we're going to learn how to create that herringbone style component today. We're going to begin with around about 10 inches of slightly heavier gauge wire than normal. So this is a gauge that is a little bit trickier to work with, a little bit trickier to get warm, but it's so worth it. This is a 16 gauge wire. I'm working with a raw copper, which is a soft to medium wire. It's just very cold today, so I'm just going to smooth that through, and again that's around about 10 inches of wire. We're going to set one of those gorgeous glass serpentine beads in the centre of that wire, and then we're going to set to work with our second gauge of wire. I'll be working from the reel today, so leave your wire connected to the reel. It might get a little bit noisy, but it just means that you don't run out. Now this is a 20 gauge wire, and it's going to become apparent why we're working with a heavier wire for the core. The core wire is that which runs through the centre of the bead. Now normally I would use an 18 gauge and then I would wrap with something a little bit lighter and all would be well with the world. But today we're going to wrap with a 20 gauge wire, which is just a little bit stiffer than usual. So my bead is sitting in the centre of that length of the heavier core wire, and I'm going to lay about ½ an inch over the top of my 20 gauge wire, which again is connected to the reel. And I'm going to bring that around the core wire a couple of times. Just twice is enough, but what you do need to do is make sure that those little spirals around the core wire are neat, and then you can trim away any excess. Just make sure that you don't get that to ping off into infinity. I'm going to take that away to the scrap pot right now. And then what we need to do is to make sure that that little sticky outy bit, the cut end, sits down against that core wire like so, and just tighten that up so that it's really neat and tidy. Now the joy of a herringbone is that you can make it as large or as small as you like, and I'm going to make sure that my bead is sat centrally on that 10-inch length of the heavier wire, and you can just push the lighter wrapping wire into position. So I'm just going to tilt it so that the wire is coming away to the right and it is on top of my core wire. You will hear the reel banging around on the desk. There's not much I can do about that, I'm afraid. What we need to do is to warm just the first inch or so of this lighter wrapping wire. We don't want it to get too overworked, and the reason that the cut end moves towards the bead is that it can just snuggle down inside the end. There's very large holes in these beautiful beads. What we're going to do to begin with is draw the wire around the outside of that bead from the top of the core to the top of the core, and I'm just going to bring that around in a nice circuit that touches all the way along the outside of that bead. I'm then going to pinch that little halo of wire into position, draw the tail of wire underneath the core, and then back around over the top. Now at this stage you might like to take a second just to make sure that that wrap is nice and firmly adhered to the centre of your core wire. What we're looking for is to keep the wrapping wire always on top of the core wire and as close as possible to our beautiful central glass bead. Now again, there will be a little bit of banging from that reel. So I'm now going to switch that around so that the naked side of the glass bead is to my dominant side. You can absolutely work in the opposite direction if you are left dominant. The main thing to remember is that our wrapping wire goes from the top of the core to the top of the core. If you find that that's a little bit loose and it doesn't go up against the edge of the wire, you can pop your pliers over the top and rotate that around just a little bit, and you'll find that that soon tightens up. So we're going to be working with the first couple of inches of that lighter wrapping wire at a time. Let's get that nice and warm and smooth and draw it all the way around the outside of that glass bead, keeping it firmly attached over the top, from the top to the top. Hold that in position. Make sure that you give that a bit of a pinch whilst you draw the tail of the wire that's connected to the reel underneath the core, all the way around and back over the top. So we're only ever going over the top, around and underneath and back in the same direction. So it's one additional circuit. It comes over the top, all the way around and over the top again. So we need to make sure that that's nice and firmly in position. You can protect your beautiful glass bead with your thumbnail and just bring your pliers very gently to make sure that that's nice and tight. Now we're going to repeat this a number of times around the sides of the bead. You can do this 2 or 3 times only, or you can do this about 7 times, as I have done in the component shown in the top left of your screen. So let's warm through that first couple of inches of wire. What we're going to do is to bring the wire that's attached to the reel around the side. So if I just tilt this upwards slightly, we're bringing it underneath that first pass of wire on the side of the bead. So it just scooches next to it, but as you're looking from the top, it's underneath. Pinch that into position, bring your tail of wire over the top. So the tail of wire always passes over the top of your core, all the way around, underneath, back over the top, nice and tight. If there's a gap just here, we need to scooch that down and tighten that little rotation up neatly before we go any further. So again, warm through the first couple of inches of wire only. If I just tilt that up ever so slightly, I'm drawing the next pass of wire around the edge of the bead again, directly underneath the last pass of wire. Draw that firmly so that your tail of wire that's attached to the reel comes back over the top of the core. Pinch it into position, draw the tail all the way around as tightly as possible to the core and to the preceding wrap. So at this stage you can take a second just to give that a very gentle squish. Be mindful of your bead. If it helps you, you can pop your thumbnail over the top just to protect the end of that glass bead. And I'm going to keep doing the same process. Now, as your reel sits on your desk, you're twisting the wire quite a lot during this process. So you might get a little bit of tension in the wire. You can ease this by flipping your reel over, or just continuously warm only the first about 1.5 to 2 inches of wire on that strand that goes towards the reel. So as you can see, we already have 2 passes of wire on this side of the bead. I'm going to continue again. Smooth and warm, draw around the edge of the bead, snuggle underneath, pull over the top of the core, wrap all the way around, and you can do this as many or as few times as you desire. The reason I'm working with a 20 gauge wire today is that you will have a much longer lasting design. You may, if you like, practice this design with a lighter wire, say a 22 gauge wire or even a 24 gauge wire. It's a really useful way to get the flow of the wrap. But what it means is that your design won't have the same longevity. So do, when you come to make a piece that you wish to keep, sell or gift, try to go up to that 20 gauge. So again, I'm bringing the wire around the outside edge of that bead, underneath the last pass that you made, pinch it into position, tail of wire comes over the top of that core, wraps underneath and around. Let's give that another warm through the first couple of inches or so. If you get any really big deviations in your wire, it pays you to get that sorted before you make the wrap. So for me, I will just take a second to make sure that those end wraps are tight against the preceding wrap, and I'll very softly straighten that wire before I warm it through. Let's tilt to the side, and you can see that I need to bring the long length of wire here underneath the preceding pass of wire, pinch it into position, draw the tail over the top of that core. Naturally enough, I've snagged something on the board. It's not a surprise. Hold that all in position, draw the tail of wire around and back over the top. And you, as I mentioned before, can repeat this as many or as few times as you like. Let's go a few more. So around the edge, draw the wire underneath the preceding pass, bring the tail over the top of the core wire and wrap around. I'm going to go, I think, 2 more times. So draw the tail of wire between thumb and forefinger to make sure it's nice and warm, underneath, against the edge of the bead, and then over the top of that core wire, all the way around. Make it steady, nice and warm. You may need to unspool a little bit more wire. It is quite wire hungry. And then I think we'll go for one more on this side. Make sure that your wire wraps are nice and neat and tidy. You may use your pliers just to help you get that level of perfection there. And then warm through, draw the tail around the outside of your bead, but bring it over the top of that core wire. So this is the last time on this end that I'm going to create one of those wraps. Warm that through, around the outside, underneath that last pass of wire, pinch into position, draw the tail around all the way over the top. But instead of going again, we're going to wrap one more time around the top and then bring that to an end. So grab your flush cutters, trim away that noisy reel of wire, and then we're going to tidy up with the bent chain nose pliers. You can use your chain nose pliers or any flat pliers. Chain nose pliers are good because they have a tapered tip and they will help you get into those tighter areas in your wire wrapping. So I'm just going to condense those wraps down as much as I can, smooth the end of that wrap away, and make sure that I haven't moved anything around whilst I've just brought all that into position. So already we have a really lovely, almost like a saddleback design with that herringbone style weave. But what we're going to do is to create a component today. So on either end of my 10-inch length with the herringbone in the middle, I'm going to grip across. I'm going to pull out sideways like so. And then I'm going to use my memory wire finishing pliers and probably use the larger side on here just to create a wrapped loop on the end. So let's go all the way around and over the top. Squish that down into position, and then you can add directly into chain at this point if you wanted to. Just slide the end link of your chain on before you move on to the next stage. So I'm going to repeat that on the other end. Push the wire out to the side and then create a rounded form. Let's draw that all the way around and over the top. Just push that down into position. So we're going to imagine that I have added in my chain if I wanted to go directly into chain, as you could see on the example bracelet just here. But we are just making a component today. So what we're going to do is close up these loops. I'm going to give them a bit of a strengthen first, although being that 16 gauge wire, they're already quite sturdy. Let's make sure that they look even. And what we're going to do is to draw that tail of wire all the way around and create a standard wrapped loop. And then we're going to do something a little bit extra. So I've got 2 wraps around so far. I'm going to tighten up those 2 wraps. Give that a bit of a squish and a squeeze. Let's have a look at the other end. I need to make sure that my loops are the same size. Give them a bit of a strengthen and then draw the tail of wire around. So that's 1 and then a second rotation. So the reason I'm doing this bit by bit is because I want to assess how much space is left in the design. And I think probably if I just scooch that up a little bit, I can get 1 more wrap of that tail wire on either side. So 1 on this end. Get that squished really firmly into position. I've got a nice strong basis for my component now. So let's have a look at the other end. We're going to bring the tail all the way around underneath and then back over the top. Let's squish that down. So I've got matching number of wraps at either end, like so. And what we're going to do now is to make sure that both of those ends are trimmed to an equal length. So let's just trim one end first. And then the other end, you could use a ruler if you wanted to make this precise. I'm going to kind of eyeball it and hope that they're similar enough. So let's get that piece out of the way. We're now going to use either round nose pliers or again our memory wire finishing pliers to create some spirals to sit over the top of those little spiral parts we've just created. And in that way you'll be able to make them look similar enough, because on one side you've got those extra 2 wraps. The extra 2 wraps that were at the beginning of the herringbone have disappeared into the bead, so we need to make them disappear at the other end as well. So let's start by rotating the wire around to create a nice spiral. So begin slowly. Stop before you get to a complete circular form. So you can see I've left a little bit of a gap just there. And then I'm going to push that into my non-dominant hand to create a lovely spiral. And in a second, I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other end. So once you've created your spiral at either end, what we're going to do is push that down towards the loop at the side there. So let's push that over. You can grip with your flat facing pliers and then just twist and press down. You can also give that a little bit of refinement if you need to, just to get that sitting centralized. If you do find that you get any tool marks, you can grab yourself a nail buffer and give that a bit of a smooth, and that will, generally speaking, polish them out if that is a problem. I've done the same on the other end. With your 4-sided nail buffers, generally you can find them at Dollar Tree, Dollar Store, anywhere like that. They're very inexpensive, but you'd start on the number 1, which is the file, and then move down through the effectively grits until you can give that a bit of a smooth. So if you do get any tool marks, you can fix that. Now, to refine your herringbone design, you can open these little ridges out just a little bit. Now, it's a slow process, so what I'm going to do is to use my bent chain nose pliers to grip along the wires as they come away from one of the core wires, and just very, very gently smooth them out a little bit and lift them away. And what this does is it just opens up your design ever so slightly. So you can see it's very clustered up at the top there. But if you go in with the tip of your chain nose pliers, you can just open that out very, very gently. Please be mindful of the glass bead if you're working with the glass bead, and you don't have to do this section if you don't want to, but I find it just adds a little bit of refinement to that herringbone design and makes it look just a little bit more like a dragon's eye or a snake's eye, which I kind of like. So once you've opened that out just a little bit, you've also added some strength and definition to the design, just a little bit more just here, I think. Now, if you're going to wear that as a choker centre, that's absolutely fine as it is. But if you want to wear this on the back of the wrist, we need to add a little bit of curvature. So because we started with that 16 gauge wire in the centre, these beads are absolutely wonderful for having large holes in the middle, which means that you can use a heavier wire. What we're going to do is to draw that around like so. So I'm just going to put my fingers on the underside of the design and very, very softly just impress some heat into the design. Try not to just grab it by the wrapped loop and bend there, because that will be already probably the weakest point of the design. You've already made the wire work very hard just here. So do go a little bit gently. You can also just very softly curve the actual wrapped loop itself. So very, very gently just curve that around, and you'll find within a few moments you'll be able to sit that on the back of the wrist much more comfortably. So let's have a look at those two side by side. As a component, these are absolutely wonderful in the centre of bracelets. If you don't curve them, you can absolutely use them as earring drops. You can add another bead at the bottom or a pendant of any description. And it really does work ever so well with the other rounded beads in the design collection as well. So I hope that you have enjoyed Year of the Snake. My name is Jem, and this is Jessie James Beads.